I believe that a big part of why the church in the West is so weak and so full of unregenerate, nominal, worldly Christians is because we have become, by and large, anti-intellectual. We refuse to use our brains. We separate thinking from faith somehow. We say faith is the experience of some sort of feeling. A spirit-filled church is one where everybody's got their hands raised and the music's so good and you are emotionally moved. Never mind that it's supposed to be the spirit of truth that is present. The reality is we live in a culture in church where we despise theology, orthodoxy, and creed while embracing the superficial, shallow teaching of men and women who value inclusion more than they value truth. That's the reality. And listen, here's our defense, and I get it. People will say this and they'll defend this and say, but doctrine divides. I mean, I've listened to countless arguments of people arguing and being rude to one another over doctrine. But listen to me, friends. Doctrine is God's idea. Doctrine is just teaching. Doctrine is just saying that God has actually taught something, that he desires for us to know and understand something. Doctrine is God's idea. Ignorance for the sake of inclusion is man's idea. God's idea, man's idea. I'll take God's idea every time. Church family, listen to me. Doctrine matters. What you believe matters. The content of your faith matters. There is doctrine and theology on every page of the Bible. It is not optional. It is not simply for scholars. Listen, church family, your faith is grounded in theology one way or another. Whether it's the view of the true and living God who has revealed himself in the scriptures or the God of your own imagination, you are living in accord with some doctrine whether you claim it or not. You cannot escape it or avoid it. See, the problem isn't doctrine, the problem is us. The problem is we squabble over the insignificant while refusing to contend for the essential, central doctrines of the faith. And so, hear me, I get it. Not all doctrine is equal. For example, I hold the conviction that only believers should be baptized, while my Presbyterian brothers and sisters wrongly believe that we should baptize our unregenerate children. And hear me, this is an important issue. It's important. It's not central. It's important, but it's not central. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus lived and died too. They believe in Jesus, but their doctrine is very, very different. Our theology is contradictory. The content of our faith, it's worlds apart. What we believe about what Jesus did and who he was, it's opposite. There is no fellowship between myself and Jehovah's Witnesses. I can fellowship with my Presbyterian brothers and sisters. So there's that oft-quoted adage that I think is very helpful here. It says, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity or love. Now, here's an obvious question. How do we know the difference? How do we know the difference between those essential, central doctrines and those peripheral doctrines? How do we know? Well, for some reason, we seem to think that because it's just so difficult to distinguish that, what we need to do is leave it to the guys in the ivory tower who are in seminary to somehow tell us which ones are important and which aren't, or just to avoid the whole mess, period. That's not the case. How do we distinguish? Well, I would argue to distinguish between the essential and the peripheral by learning more about Scripture, not less. By exposing yourself more to the teaching of Scripture, by caring about what God says more, not less.